A young girl was forced to marry a wealthy old man to pay off a debt. On their wedding night, when she saw the man step out of the bathroom, she was so shocked she couldn't say a word. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. Your support helps us bring more amazing stories your way. Thank you. "We can't choose the storms that hit us," Adeline murmured softly, her fingers grazing the worn edges of an old photograph. "But we can choose how we weather them." Life had etched its lessons deep into her soul. Adeline had always known poverty, felt its grip tightening around her life like relentless vines. Yet, through every hardship, her parents' quiet wisdom echoed clearly. Education was the one gift no storm could wash away. Now, at 24, she carried memories as much as dreams. Each morning, standing behind the small cash register of the modest grocery store downtown, she reminded herself of the journey that brought her here. She remembered the leaky roofs of the abandoned warehouse that had once been their home, rain pouring through cracks, soaking the cardboard they used as blankets. Those cold nights were vivid reminders of how far she'd come and how far she still had to go. "Morning, Adeline," called Mrs. Jackson, a regular customer whose kindness was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Morning, Mrs. Jackson," Adeline replied warmly, her smile genuine despite the tiredness in her eyes. "You holding up okay, sweetheart?" Adeline nodded, her gaze softening. "Always doing my best." The older woman studied her carefully, as though reading deeper truths between her words. "You know, child, life has its own ways of opening doors. Just gotta believe your moment will come." Adeline nodded, grateful yet unconvinced. Her moment? She'd dreamed it once, hoped against hope that love and acceptance might knock softly at her heart's door. But time after time, she'd watched the warm smiles of interested young men fade as they uncovered her past. Poverty wasn't just an empty pocket. It seemed like a shadow cast upon her very soul. She finished her shift and stepped out onto the bustling sidewalk, feeling both lonely and comforted by the familiar city sounds. Her small apartment was just around the corner, simple and neat. A quiet sanctuary filled with books she cherished dearly. "Addie, wait up!" came a familiar voice behind her. She turned to see Antonio jogging toward her, his worn boots echoing faintly against the pavement. "Hey, Antonio," she greeted softly, concern immediately tightening her chest. His expression was heavy with disappointment, eyes reflecting pain she knew all too well. "You okay?" "Rejected again," he sighed, rubbing his face wearily. "Third job interview this week. Same reason. They think I'll quit soon as I find something better." "They're wrong," she said fiercely, squeezing his arm. "You're the hardest working man I know." "Yeah," he managed a weak smile, "but hard work doesn't seem enough." Together they walked quietly, side by side, each silently carrying the weight of their shared burden. Antonio broke the silence first, his voice low, yet resolute. "Sometimes I wonder, Addie. Maybe life is trying to teach us something deeper, something about strength we don't yet see." She paused, looking up at him thoughtfully. "What do you mean?" Antonio shrugged slightly. "We were raised to believe education and perseverance would set us free, right? Maybe freedom isn't about escaping where we came from. Maybe it's about owning our story, refusing to let shame define us." Adeline took a deep breath, his words striking a hidden chord within her. "Maybe you're right, but how do we get others to see that?" "Maybe it's not about making them see," Antonio replied quietly. "Maybe it's about seeing ourselves clearly first." As they reached her building, Antonio embraced her gently. "Don't lose hope, Addie. Something good is waiting. I feel it." Hours later, sitting alone by her window, Adeline thought about Antonio's words. The city lights blinked softly, distant stars in a concrete universe, and she pondered the weight of hope. How could she convince anyone else to accept her past if she hadn't fully accepted it herself? Adeline stared into the soft glow of the streetlights, her thoughts heavy, drifting between dreams and reality. The gentle echo of Antonio's words lingered in her heart like a quiet melody. But hope felt distant tonight, overshadowed by the weary ache she carried, deepened by years of struggle. A sudden creak of the door pulled her back. Turning quickly, she saw her mother, Isabel, standing quietly, eyes glistening with unshed tears. In her trembling hand, Isabel held a plain white envelope, looking as though its contents carried the weight of their entire future. "Mama?" Adeline whispered cautiously. "What's wrong?" Isabel moved slowly into the room, her shoulders burdened as though she carried the world itself. She sat down beside Adeline and handed her the envelope. Her voice came out quiet, almost apologetic. "A man named Gene Hackman has asked to marry you, Adeline." The words hung in the air, strangely hollow, yet heavy with meaning. Adeline's breath caught sharply, disbelief washing over her. Her fingers trembled as she slowly took the letter from her mother's hand. The paper felt strangely cold, each fold pressing sharply against her palm. "Gene Hackman? But he's—" "Yes," Isabel interrupted softly, voice nearly breaking. "He's 60, Addie." "Wealthy, powerful, and much older than you." Adeline opened the letter, eyes scanning quickly across the neat handwriting, each word echoing promises she had never dared dream of. A comfortable life, security, and provision for her family. And yet, each promise was tied tightly with invisible chains. Her heart sank, a bitter taste forming at the back of her throat. "Mama, this can't be real. I don't even know this man. How can he propose marriage to someone he's never spoken to?" Isabel took a long, painful breath. "He's known our family for years, quietly watching, always distant. Today he sent men to the house, Addie. They brought food, enough supplies for weeks. They said it was just the beginning, if you agreed to marry him." Adeline closed her eyes, picturing the faces of her family. Antonio's defeated expression haunted her, as did her father's weary posture each evening, hiding an unspoken pain. Her dreams of love felt selfish, an indulgence she couldn't afford. Isabel gently grasped her daughter's hand, her voice pleading, "Addie, you don't have to do this, but I needed you to know. There's something else." "What is it, Mama?" Adeline whispered, dread pooling in her stomach. "Your father," Isabel hesitated, tears finally breaking free. "He's ill, very ill. He needs surgery soon, but the money, it's more than we'll ever see in our lives." Adeline felt as though the air had been stolen from her lungs. A cold numbness spread throughout her chest, a silent grief she could hardly fathom. Her father had hidden this from them all, carrying the pain alone, sparing his family the burden. "He didn't want you to worry," Isabel continued softly. "But we're running out of time, Addie." The weight of the envelope felt impossibly heavier now, the neat handwriting mocking her with each line. The choice before her was clear yet cruel. She squeezed her eyes shut, desperate for guidance that refused to come. The dreams she had carefully nurtured seemed foolishly fragile against the stark reality before her. "What would you do, Mama?" she asked softly, searching her mother's eyes for strength. Isabel held her daughter's gaze firmly, her voice steadying. I've faced many difficult choices, child, but never like this. Your happiness means everything to me, but so does your father's life. Only you can decide." A silence stretched between them, thick and tense. The distant hum of traffic sounded like whispers, mocking her heart's turmoil. Finally, Adeline spoke, voice barely audible. "I need some time, Mama." "Just a little time to think." Isabel stood up slowly, brushing gentle fingers through Adeline's hair. "Whatever you choose, know that you're loved, Addie. Your choice won't change that." Once alone, Adeline sat motionless, the soft rustling of the paper beneath her fingertips deafening in the quiet room. Hours passed unnoticed until dawn broke gently through the window, spilling warmth onto her pale, weary face. In those quiet moments, clarity slowly emerged, sharp and undeniable. She rose and walked to the kitchen table where Isabel sat silently, eyes tired from a sleepless night. Adeline reached out and took her mother's hands, eyes brimming with quiet determination. "Tell Mr. Hackman I accept." Her voice trembled but remained strong, an iron strength born from sacrifice. Isabel's eyes filled instantly, grief and relief warring across her face. "Are you certain, Addie?" she whispered. Adeline nodded slowly, tears falling silently. "My dreams can wait, Mama. I can't let Papa suffer. I can't watch Antonio lose hope. If my sacrifice brings peace to our family, then it's worth it." Isabel embraced her tightly, their tears blending together, grief and gratitude inseparable. Deep within, Adeline clung desperately to a fragile thread of hope, praying that somehow, some way, this sacrifice wouldn't break her entirely. Perhaps, in the darkest nights, the dawn still waited patiently, quietly preparing to bring a brighter day. The days slipped by quietly, marked only by Adeline's anxious thoughts and a strange sense of anticipation that hovered over the small house. News of her decision traveled quickly, whispered softly among neighbors. The air seemed heavy, thick with quiet curiosity and whispered judgments. Yet within the walls of their humble home, hope slowly grew, easing the lines of worry from her parents' tired faces. Then came the morning everyone had been waiting for. Adeline awoke before dawn, watching the sky gradually shift from deep indigo to soft shades of lavender and gold. She dressed carefully, choosing her best dress, a faded blue garment worn thin by time, but still neat and dignified. Her fingers shook slightly as she tied her hair neatly back, her heart pounding gently beneath her chest. Isabel stood in the doorway, eyes soft and comforting, holding a small jar of homemade cream. With a gentle smile, she dabbed a little onto Adeline's face, smoothing it carefully into her skin. "You look lovely, sweetheart," Isabel whispered softly, eyes reflecting both pride and sorrow. "He'll see your beauty, inside and out." Adeline tried to smile, but it wavered at the edges. Her stomach twisted anxiously. Today would seal her fate, a step toward a future filled with uncertain promise. She drew a deep breath, straightening her shoulders and lifting her chin. "I'll do what I must, Mama, for all of us." Outside, Antonio paced nervously near the front porch, glancing repeatedly toward the road. Their father sat quietly on a small bench, eyes tired but hopeful, his weathered hands folded calmly in his lap. The morning air was quiet, almost peaceful, as if nature itself paused to observe the moment unfolding before them. Then they saw it, a sleek black car easing down the dusty road, sunlight reflecting sharply from its polished surface. Adeline's breath caught in her throat, heart beating frantically. The car slowed gently, coming to a stop directly in front of their home. Jean Hackman stepped carefully from the vehicle, exactly as she'd pictured, his hair silver gray, neatly combed back from a face etched with deep, thoughtful lines. He stood slightly stooped, but his presence held quiet dignity. His clothing was simple but impeccably tailored, an understated expression of wealth and sophistication. Adeline watched, breathless, as he approached her family. She waited, half expecting cold arrogance, but Jean surprised her immediately, offering a sincere, gentle smile as he greeted her parents warmly. "It's an honor to meet you both," he said, his voice calm and respectful. His eyes moved to Antonio. "And you must be Antonio? Your sister speaks highly of you." Antonio hesitated briefly, then shook Jean's outstretched hand, clearly surprised by the kindness in his eyes. "Nice to meet you, sir." Jean turned then, his gaze finally resting upon Adeline. Her heart raced as his eyes met hers, gentle and unexpectedly kind. "You must be Adeline," he said softly, offering her a careful smile. She managed a quiet nod, unable to find her voice. Something in his quiet demeanor eased the tightness in her chest, yet uncertainty lingered deep within her heart. "Would you walk with me for a moment?" Jean asked respectfully, indicating the bench near the small flower garden. "I'd very much like us to talk privately." She glanced nervously toward her parents, who nodded reassuringly. Slowly, she walked beside him, keenly aware of every step. They sat down, silence settling comfortably between them for a brief moment. "I can only imagine the questions you must have," Jean began quietly, looking thoughtfully at his clasped hands. "I want you to understand this clearly. I mean no harm. I've seen your family struggle. You're a remarkable young woman, Adeline. Strong, intelligent, compassionate. I believe you deserve a better life." Adeline studied him cautiously. "But why me? You barely know me." He smiled gently, his eyes softening. "Maybe we don't know each other well yet, but I know enough. Your strength shines brighter than your circumstances. Marrying me is a sacrifice, I realize, but it's one I promise to repay with kindness, respect, and care for both you and your family." His sincerity touched something deep within her heart, softening her fears just a little. "I want to trust you," she admitted quietly, eyes filling slowly with tears. "But it's not easy. My family needs me, and I need to be sure." Jean reached carefully into his pocket, pulling out a small handkerchief and offering it to her. "Trust takes time," he said gently, "but I promise I'll earn yours. Let me help your family, Adeline. Allow me to ease their burdens, and perhaps someday yours." She accepted the handkerchief, wiping softly at her eyes. Silence stretched gently between them again, filled with quiet contemplation. Adeline looked toward the house, seeing relief finally easing the faces of those she loved. Perhaps, she thought, sacrifice was sometimes necessary to secure happiness for others. Turning back to Jean, she drew a deep breath, steadying herself with newfound resolve. "I'll marry you," she whispered softly but firmly. "Not just because I have to, but because I believe you might be different." His face softened even further, eyes warm with gratitude and gentle respect. "Thank you, Adeline. I promise you'll never regret this choice." They rose slowly, returning to her waiting family. Isabel's eyes searched her daughter's face carefully, relieved to see a quiet acceptance there. Antonio nodded slowly, proud yet pained by his sister's bravery. The wedding day arrived quietly, like a whisper carried gently by the wind, bringing both anticipation and dread to Adeline's heart. She awoke early, staring at the worn ceiling above, thoughts drifting restlessly through her mind. The faint scent of wild flowers from outside mixed with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee that drifted gently from the kitchen. Yet nothing could ease the heaviness weighing upon her spirit. Isabel came softly to her side, gently touching her shoulder, her voice careful and soft. "It's time, sweetheart." The quiet reassurance in her mother's voice steadied her nerves just enough for Adeline to rise slowly from the bed. Isabel's gentle touch and the comforting silence shared between mother and daughter carried its own quiet strength. Women from the village soon filled the modest home, each carrying small tokens of love and warmth. Adeline watched silently as they gathered around her, smoothing out her simple wedding dress, a humble creation of soft cotton pieced together by their loving hands. Each stitch seemed woven with tenderness, an invisible bond of support and sympathy shared between women who had known hardship and sacrifice. Adeline stood before the mirror, seeing her reflection framed in delicate lace and humble fabric. The young woman staring back seemed like a stranger. A quiet sadness filled her eyes, a deep ache hidden beneath layers of quiet strength and resolve. This wasn't the wedding she had imagined, nor was it the life she'd dreamed of. Yet the gentle smiles of the women around her reminded her of why she'd chosen this path. For her family, for love, even when love meant sacrificing herself. Outside, the villagers had decorated the small chapel simply yet beautifully. Wildflowers gathered from nearby fields adorned the wooden pews, their gentle fragrance softening the air. Adeline stood at the chapel's entrance, clutching a small bouquet, its petals trembling slightly between her fingers. Her heart felt heavy, her breath shallow. Antonio stepped close, offering his arm silently, eyes darkened with quiet pride and sadness. They exchanged no words, yet the bond between them spoke louder than words ever could. Taking a steadying breath, she took her brother's arm, each step forward feeling both courageous and heartbreaking. Inside, Jean stood waiting patiently, his posture dignified, his suit impeccable. His kind eyes warmed as Adeline slowly approached. He looked at her gently, silently acknowledging the sacrifice she was making. Adeline kept her gaze forward, her pulse quickening slightly. The preacher's voice drifted quietly through the chapel, words of love, sacrifice, and loyalty filling the small space. Jean gently took her hand in his own, the touch surprisingly gentle, his warmth a quiet reassurance amidst the uncertainty of her heart. "Adeline," the preacher asked gently, "do you take this man to be your husband?" Her heart hesitated, a painful lump rising in her throat, tears blurring her vision. The chapel's silence deepened, everyone's eyes upon her, waiting quietly. Her gaze flickered briefly toward her family, seeing their faces, relief mixed with quiet sadness. She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible, trembling yet certain. "I do." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jean squeezed her hand gently, offering silent comfort. She glanced at him, feeling an odd gratitude for his quiet patience. The vows continued, their promises whispered quietly, yet solemnly. Adeline found herself repeating each word carefully, feeling the weight of every syllable deep in her soul. The ceremony ended softly, villagers applauding respectfully. Adeline glanced at her parents, seeing relief washing gently over their worn faces. Antonio's expression carried deep pride, mingled with a quiet sorrow only she could understand. As they exited the chapel, Jean's sleek car awaited, its polished surface reflecting the soft afternoon sun. Her heart quickened, understanding suddenly that this was the moment her new life began, a life bound to a man she hardly knew. During the drive to the city, silence settled between them, thick yet strangely comforting. Jean glanced at her occasionally, his eyes gentle, respecting her need for quiet contemplation. Adeline watched through the window, countryside turning slowly to city lights, each mile deepening her anxiety. Finally, they reached Jean's home. Adeline's breath caught sharply at the sight. A grand mansion, beautiful yet overwhelmingly large, unlike anything she had imagined. Adeline stepped into the magnificent bedroom slowly, her breath catching as she took in the sheer elegance surrounding her. The soft ivory curtains moved gently, as though touched by an invisible breeze, cascading gracefully toward polished floors. The large bed, draped in fine white linen, looked inviting, yet strangely unfamiliar, like something she'd only ever seen in a magazine. Every piece of furniture, from the golden-framed mirror to the softly glowing lamps, seemed meticulously placed to impress, yet all it did was make her feel smaller, more out of place. She hugged herself lightly, breathing shallowly, feeling the weight of the evening pressing down on her shoulders. She jumped slightly as Jean's soft footsteps approached behind her. Turning slowly, she forced a gentle smile, though uncertainty still clouded her eyes. Jean paused a respectful distance away, his kind expression gentle and understanding. His voice was soft and careful, as if he could sense her fragile state. "Adeline, I know this is all strange and new to you. Please, don't be afraid. This house is yours now. Take all the time you need. I only wish for you to feel safe here." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her, momentarily easing her fears. She nodded slowly, grateful for his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Jean," she whispered quietly, barely audible, her voice wavering gently with emotion. Jean offered another reassuring smile, then quietly added, "I'll freshen up first. Please, relax, rest if you need to." Without waiting for her reply, he turned gently toward the bathroom, the soft click of the door echoing lightly through the room. Adeline sat carefully at the edge of the bed, her hands nervously gripping the delicate fabric. Her heartbeat quickened, matching the anxious rhythm of her thoughts. She could hear the water running softly in the bathroom, its steady sound providing a comforting distraction. Minutes passed slowly, then more, yet the water continued running without pause. She glanced nervously at the clock. An hour had somehow passed unnoticed. Her pulse quickened again, the steady sound now feeling oddly unsettling. Adeline's imagination began to spiral, conjuring images of harm or illness befalling the man she'd reluctantly agreed to marry. "Jean?" she called softly, hesitant at first, her voice barely carrying over the sound of rushing water. No reply came, only the steady rush, growing louder in her ears. Worry gnawed deeply at her thoughts, but her limbs felt heavy, frozen by uncertainty. Exhaustion slowly claimed her, eyelids heavy, heart weighed down by the day's overwhelming emotions. Eventually, despite her anxiety, sleep softly pulled her under. She woke abruptly, startled by a sudden sound. Her eyes fluttered open rapidly, heart hammering wildly in her chest. The door to the bathroom creaked open slowly, steam drifting softly through the air. Adeline sat upright quickly, her entire body trembling. A figure stepped carefully into view, framed in soft, misty light. Her eyes widened in shock. Her breathing halted entirely. It was not the elderly Jean she'd married just hours earlier who stood before her. Instead, it was a much younger man, tall, handsome, strong, his youthful features illuminated gently in the room's soft glow. Fear surged powerfully through her veins, gripping her throat, rendering her voiceless. Who are you?" she finally stammered, voice trembling, barely audible. Adeline backed away in panic, heart racing like a frightened bird trapped inside her chest. Her eyes darted from the young stranger's face to the softly lit room, desperately searching for answers, for familiarity, for safety. But there was nothing, only confusion reflected in the golden mirror and uncertainty hidden behind elegant curtains. The young man stepped closer cautiously, his gentle eyes pleading for calm, hands outstretched to show he meant no harm. "Adeline," he spoke softly, almost tenderly, his voice achingly familiar, as though reaching back through her memories. "Please, listen to me." "No!" she gasped sharply, backing away further, nearly stumbling over the edge of the luxurious bed. Her breathing came fast and uneven, the room spinning dangerously around her. "Where's Jean? What did you do with him? Answer me!" He paused, sorrow softening his gaze as he sighed deeply, shoulders heavy with remorse. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet yet unmistakably familiar, the gentle intonation resonating clearly in her heart. "Adeline, it's me," he murmured quietly, eyes never leaving hers. "I am Jean." Shock rippled through her, freezing her in place. Her eyes widened, disbelief shaking her to the core. She shook her head fiercely, denial spilling forth urgently, painfully. "That's impossible. Jean's old. He's 60. You're young. Who are you, really?" He moved forward, carefully closing the distance between them. His voice was steady yet tender, trying desperately to soothe her confusion. "I promise, Adeline, I'm telling you the truth. Jean, the old man you married today, was only a disguise, a test, a mask I wore because I had to know you for who you really are." Her heart twisted painfully. His words made no sense. They were impossible, cruel even, but the sincerity in his voice couldn't be denied. Tears welled in her eyes, frustration boiling inside her, pushing fear aside. "A test?" she whispered brokenly, eyes filling quickly with tears of betrayal. "Why would you do that? How could you deceive me like this?" He stopped close enough now to gently take her shaking hands in his, warmth radiating softly through his touch. His voice trembled slightly, layered deeply with genuine remorse and tenderness. "Adeline, please believe me. I never intended to hurt you. My grandfather always spoke of you. He told me about your kindness, your selflessness. I had to see it for myself. I needed to know if the woman he described was real. If the woman who had shown compassion to an old man in need existed beyond the stories I'd heard." Confusion flickered sharply in her eyes. She tried to pull away, but he held her gently, pleading for understanding. "Your grandfather?" she repeated softly, struggling to piece together this unexpected revelation. "Yes," he whispered quietly, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "He met you once, years ago, in a grocery store downtown. He had no money, no dignity left. You helped him without hesitation, paid for his groceries, treated him with kindness, respect. That night changed his life, Adeline. He never forgot you." The memory slowly surfaced through her confusion. A frail old man, worn coat damp from the rain, trembling fingers counting coins that weren't enough. She'd paid for his groceries, quietly comforting him, never imagining such a simple act could mean anything significant. "That was your grandfather?" she murmured in disbelief, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. He nodded slowly, his expression filled with gratitude and reverence. "He talked about you constantly. He said kindness like yours was rare, that you were someone special. He wanted to help you, but he passed before he could do anything. Before he died, he asked me to find you, to make sure you were safe. But I had to be sure your heart was true." Adeline's legs weakened, the room around her feeling suddenly too vast, too overwhelming. Carefully, he guided her to sit on the edge of the bed, kneeling gently before her, his eyes pleading softly for forgiveness. "All this," she whispered, voice barely audible, "was just to test me? You pretended to be someone else just to prove what? To prove you were sincere, he said quietly, earnestly. I've spent my life surrounded by people who care only about money, status. But you were different. You showed compassion to a stranger, kindness without expectation. I needed to know if that kindness was real. And it was, Adeline. It is. She trembled quietly, feeling torn between anger and a strange, fragile relief. This revelation shook the foundation of everything she'd believed in, everything she had reluctantly accepted. How could you be so cruel? She whispered brokenly, tears freely falling now. Do you have any idea how afraid I've been? How hard it was to marry someone I didn't love, to sacrifice everything for my family? His expression softened further, guilt darkening his eyes. I never meant cruelty. I promise. I never meant to hurt you. But the moment I met you, even hidden behind that mask, I saw clearly who you were. Your courage, your strength, your genuine heart. And the truth is, somewhere in all this mess, I fell in love with you. She looked away, breath shaking softly, heart trembling beneath layers of confusion and hurt. His words struck deeply, pulling at something she wasn't ready to confront. Slowly, she met his eyes again, searching them carefully for any hint of deceit. But there was only sincerity, remorse, and tenderness. You deceived me, she murmured painfully. How am I supposed to trust you now? He squeezed her hands gently, his voice filled with quiet determination. Trust takes time, Adeline. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness yet, but please, give me a chance to earn it. Let me show you who I really am, not the mask I wore. Silence stretched gently between them, tension gradually easing as understanding seeped softly into her heart. He had deceived her, yes, but beneath the deception was something real, something genuine and fragile. Perhaps, she considered carefully, this strange revelation offered a chance at something she hadn't dared imagine. Real happiness, real love. Slowly, carefully, she nodded, offering him the smallest fragile thread of hope. All right, she whispered softly, voice trembling, yet gentle. I'll try. In the quiet stillness that followed, Jean softly moved toward the door and opened it gently. Two figures entered quietly, carrying small boxes and delicate brushes. Adeline watched curiously, anxiety flickering softly in her chest, yet comforted by Jean's gentle, reassuring gaze. These are the makeup artists, Jean explained softly, stepping close again, voice calm and comforting. I want you to understand fully, Adeline, everything that happened and why. She nodded slowly, heart pounding gently, watching as the artists began their work. Layer by careful layer, wrinkle by painstaking wrinkle, they reconstructed Jean's elderly disguise. Adeline watched in silent amazement, heart heavy with memories of fear, confusion, and unexpected tenderness. The young, handsome man she'd just begun to accept was slowly disappearing before her eyes, replaced once again by the frail old man she'd first agreed to marry. When the artists finally stepped away, finished with their intricate work, Adeline stared quietly at Jean. He stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, face lined with false age, eyes gentle and searching. Her breath caught softly, emotion tightening gently in her throat. Carefully, almost fearfully, she approached him. Raising a trembling hand, she gently touched his cheek, fingertips softly brushing the carefully crafted wrinkles. They felt strangely unreal, yet beneath the mask, she still saw clearly the warm sincerity shining quietly from his eyes. Emotion overwhelmed her suddenly, tears blurring her vision. She realized with quiet clarity that beneath the layers of makeup, beneath deception and confusion, stood the same man who'd patiently respected her fears, who'd admired her courage, who'd carefully woven kindness into each moment shared. Adeline's tears fell freely now, washing away the lingering bitterness, fear, and hurt. Her voice trembled, quiet yet firm, filled with a newfound truth she could no longer deny. "Old or young, Jean, I don't care. I love you because you're you. That's enough." Jean's eyes softened immediately, relief washing gently across his carefully disguised face. Without hesitation, he opened his arms, gently welcoming her into his embrace. Adeline leaned softly against his chest, finally allowing the warmth of comfort to fill the emptiness she'd carried for far too long. Jean whispered softly into her hair, voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Adeline. I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted honesty, yet it was me who needed to learn what real honesty meant. You've shown me that clearly now." She pulled back slightly, looking carefully into his eyes, sincerity shining clearly through tears. "When did you really fall in love with me, Jean?" she asked softly, gently searching his eyes for answers she already felt in her heart. He paused, a tender smile touching his lips. "The very first time I saw you, when you stood quietly, bravely, facing poverty without complaint, without shame. When you held your head high, accepting hardships gracefully. That strength, that silent dignity, captured my heart instantly." Her tears fell again softly, each word melting deeper into her heart. "I had no idea," she whispered quietly, warmth blossoming gently within her. "I thought you were simply being kind out of pity or obligation." He shook his head slowly, eyes filled gently with honest warmth. "No, Adeline. Your courage made me want to become a better man, to deserve someone as extraordinary as you. When I saw your quiet strength, I realized quickly how shallow my own fears had been. Love isn't something you can test. It's something you build, moment by careful moment, trust by gentle trust." Her heart swelled gently, warmth spreading softly through her entire being. This man, standing quietly before her, vulnerable beneath the false mask he'd once hidden behind, had somehow transformed their relationship from obligation into genuine affection. Quietly, she knew, their love was born from something deeper than mere attraction, born from the quiet strength forged through trials neither had fully expected. Slowly, gently, she leaned into him again, allowing her fears to dissolve entirely within the comfort of his embrace. Together they stood, wrapped in quiet understanding, sharing a silent promise more powerful than any spoken vow. Trust had been tested, strained, nearly shattered, yet here they stood, hearts carefully mended, bonded by honesty, humility, and genuine affection. "I don't want secrets between us anymore," Adeline whispered softly, finally stepping back slightly, eyes gently meeting his. "From now on, we face everything together, openly, honestly." Jean nodded quietly, his expression calm and deeply sincere. "No more secrets. Just you and me, Adeline. Honesty, trust, and real love." Their hands found each other naturally, fingers softly intertwining in silent affirmation. This quiet moment, more than any grand gesture or spoken vow, confirmed the truth they both now accepted fully. Adeline smiled softly, allowing happiness, a quiet, genuine happiness, to finally settle deeply within her soul. She was no longer the frightened young woman who'd reluctantly married an elderly stranger. Instead, She was someone deeply loved, truly cherished by a man whose heart had been shaped by humility, kindness, and respect. From this day forward, she understood clearly, love wasn't defined by age, wealth, or outward appearances. Real love was quiet strength, tender forgiveness, patient understanding. And in Jean's gentle gaze, she saw clearly her own reflection, strong, capable, and worthy of genuine happiness. Together, quietly embracing the truth, they stepped carefully forward into the gentle morning sunlight, ready, finally, to begin their life together, not from obligation, but from a bond gently forged through trials, tempered by forgiveness, and strengthened deeply by love. The story of Adeline and Jean is deeply moving, highlighting an extraordinary journey of resilience, courage, and forgiveness. Adeline's journey impresses readers through her profound strength and selflessness, as she bravely accepts personal sacrifice for the well-being of her family. Her character embodies quiet dignity amid hardship, showing remarkable inner strength in the face of poverty and societal prejudice. Jean's transformation, from a man hiding behind deception to someone openly vulnerable and sincere, adds depth, revealing how genuine love and trust require honesty and humility. Their journey imparts a powerful message about the true essence of love and human connection. Love, as the story beautifully illustrates, is not defined by superficial attributes such as age, wealth, or social status. Instead, it is built on genuine acts of kindness, empathy, patience, and forgiveness. The narrative also underscores the importance of honesty and integrity in relationships. Jean's initial deception, though misguided, ultimately reveals a deeper truth. Love demands transparency and mutual respect. Moreover, the tale teaches valuable lessons about overcoming prejudice and accepting others based on character rather than external appearances or societal judgments. Adeline's ability to forgive Jean and embrace him for who he truly is shows remarkable emotional maturity and compassion. Her choice demonstrates that true happiness lies in acceptance, forgiveness, and unconditional love. Ultimately, the most profound lesson is that love flourishes not through perfection, but through embracing imperfection with kindness and sincerity. Adeline and Jean's story inspires readers to look beyond appearances, to value compassion over wealth, and to understand that forgiveness and acceptance have the transformative power to heal even the deepest wounds. It is a poignant reminder that genuine love arises from the courage to face and embrace our true selves. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way.